Hello everyone, hope you are all well today and welcome you all to today's webinar hosted by FlowForma, an award-winning process automation tool. We are delighted to be joined today by special guests from Forrester Research, and we are all really excited to have you today as we discuss how organizations should and can double down on process automation to reap an overwhelming competitive advantage. So, I am delighted to be joined by two very special guests today. Firstly, we have Bernhard Schaffrik. He is a principal analyst at Forrester, and his research supports CIOs and technology leaders with their broader transformation challenges. His thought leadership provides guidance on how to manage technology-driven business models and how to drive sustainable technology information. So welcome, Bernhard. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Gerard Newman. Gerard Newman is the CTO here at FlowForma Process Automation, and he has over 20 years experience designing, delivering process automation solutions that have allowed businesses just like yours to integrate and automate their operations to deliver better customer experiences and improved efficiency. Gerard is also focused in ideating new concepts for our products roadmap, helping businesses to make the complex simple. So welcome, Gerard, and welcome, Bernhard.
Thanks, Ursula. Hello, everyone.
Without further ado, I'm actually going to hand over to Bernhard, and he's going to bring you through his thoughts and tips and tricks on how to implement process automation into your own business.
Thanks a lot, Ursula. And thanks for having me to the FlowForma team, and thanks to the audience for joining. Yeah, let's dive right into it. And, you know, as an analyst, you get to see and hear a lot. So talking to customers who are successfully implementing process automation solution, benefiting from automation, but also those that are struggling. And so you hear a lot, you see a lot, and I'd like to start with sharing a couple of these observations, what we are hearing and seeing as analysts when it comes to automation, not necessarily limited to digital process automation, but automation in general. And what we are seeing and hearing, and I guess this is something you might share and have experienced as well, is that there are islands of automation about. So every company, small up to mid-sized, up to very large companies, they have embarked on automation journeys, which is a good thing. But what we are seeing is that there are lots of automation silos, or again, islands across an organization. If you're working for a manufacturer on plant level, you might see industrial automation, a lot of physical automation, physical robots. Now, not only with the advent of ChatGPT, but also before, there were many chatbots around, maybe for internal IT help desk, but also for customer facing tasks and workloads from different lines of business. Then, of course, digital process automation tools for rather long-running, rather static processes, RPA all over the place to automate tasks, but also processes. So again, it's a good thing. However, there are some downsides to that. And one is that the pandemic led to RPA being really overhyped, which is not a surprise because everybody wanted to get back into business while everybody was working from home. So RPA helped to rapidly digitize broken processes and bring companies back into operation. Now, what happens if you want to not only secure your RPA investments, but try to seek further use cases and workloads for RPA? Maybe RPA is not the right choice for every type of automation challenge. And I'm seeing lots of over complex bots. Almost nobody is able to handle and manage once they break or just pause. So you build the stuff from scratch. So maybe another automation solution in such a case would have been a better choice. Number two, different automation challenges, of course, require different automation technologies, which is why we see that landscape of different technologies. And of course, people started their own automation projects, embarking on their journeys, selecting their own technologies, which are somewhat unaligned. And bottom line is that end-to-end processes are still hardly getting automated. At least we don't hear too many success stories from our clients or from practitioners across the various industries about success when it comes to automating end-to-end processes. Now you might argue, why is he mentioning that? We automated so much, it's good. And yeah, so I'm not trying to downplay that, but What we are also hearing and seeing as challenges from many automation users is that they're saying, these automation technologies are pretty expensive and we had to upskill so many of our people, which is all good. However, we want to secure the investment. We are also having now developed a higher appetite for more automation. And now we have automated all the low-hanging fruits, all the tasks we could potentially automate that would make sense from an economic or an ROI point of view. Now, we want to get into the next kind of realm of automation, which is more complex tasks, more sequences of tasks, aka processes. So Forrester, help us. How can we scale automation? How can we automate end-to-end processes as a next step? And automation scaling is actually what I'd like to talk with you about. And automation scaling can come in two facets or perspectives. So on the left-hand side, there is just more of the same. So imagine you invested in RPA and you have built so and so many bots and they run properly. And now you want to build double as many bots and for similar use cases. Or you have automated a customer onboarding process and now it comes in a different flavor, in an additional variation for a specific customer group. And you want to leverage your existing skills and the existing licenses and the existing center of excellence you have built in order to also automate that process. This is kind of more of the same, leveraging economies of scale, versus the other category of automation scaling, which is again this higher complexity use cases, usually coming in the form of end-to-end processes with lots of tasks, with lots of variability, which requires a different response. When we talk about scaling automation towards more of the same, you actually need more resources, not a one-on-one scaling of people and licenses, but this is why you usually organize these resources and skills centrally in COEs or similar formats. But as you scale more linearly, you need more licenses, you need the tools you have, but maybe upskill even more people. So it's about efficiency. And when we talk about the high complexity use cases, then it's not about so much economies of scale, but also economies of scope. And usually what this means is you need additional skills, maybe people that could be called citizen developers or business developers, but you also need process subject matter experts who make you understand how you can automate that end-to-end process or a fraction of the end-to-end process, which reaches way beyond rather mundane task automation. You might also need to invest in additional tools which require additional investments. Could be task mining, could be process mining, could be an integration tool, could be some connectors, could be accessibility to data sources. So it's a different game to scale automation when it comes to higher complexity of the use case you're targeting. And why is that? So actually the answer is simple, but it's hard to realize. When you automate the easy, the low-hanging fruits, the remainder just gets difficult. And it's getting difficult because you're challenged by longer sequences of a variety of tasks versus the one or just two or three. There are many people involved in these sequences of tasks, aka processes. So more roles and different access types, and therefore additional data sources and IT systems are involved, which require to be connected. And it also requires a higher degree of collaboration among the people whose work you're intending to automate. So all this is adding up to the complexity pile. And this is something I'd like to touch upon, how to tackle that in this webinar. Of course, we can only stay quite high level, but hoping to provide some guidance at least. This is a snapshot of a survey we have been repeatedly conducting for at least 10 or so years. And on an annual basis, usually Q3, Q4 of a year, we are asking hundreds of technology executives who have some responsibility when it comes to digital transformation, automation technologies, process insights, and turning them into automated processes, into transformational programs. And again, we have been asking similar questions throughout the years. And what we could observe now compared to up until 2020, 2021 or so, end-to-end automation, the real complex things, they have always been out of scope, or they have been targets for, the packaged solutions coming from SAP or Salesforce or ServiceNow. But when it comes to company individual end-to-end processes that might represent your intellectual property, that might be the reason why you are in the market position where you are, automating them fully or partially, or the majority of tasks, is something that has always been out of scope. Now, with the evolution of all these beautiful automation technologies, it seems like, and this is what this snapshot is supposed to tell you, that this is something these technology executives are targeting. And if you look at the first three questions we were asking them from the top, you can see that the majority of the responses actually confirm that, yes, at this point in time, we are going to drive end-to-end automation. And we are not only going to do that because of, I don't know, efficiency, internal reasons, maybe even audit reasons, but if you read the first entry from the top, we plan to automate large numbers of currently manual processes to drive end-to-end digital transformation. That's a customer-facing outcome from end-to-end automation. Or number two, we plan to reinvent and reimagine existing processes to better support our digital business strategies. So end-to-end automation is something technology executives are looking for, are driving, not shying away from the complexity, which is kind of a given. So it's become more and more of a priority for many technology executives we are talking to recently, how to scale automation and how to tackle the more complex use cases and processes. Now, one of their most urgent questions, among others, and we will touch upon the others as well, how to govern such scaled setups. And it's important because up to a point, scaling automation would involve your existing capacity of professional developers or any external workbench or business process outsourcing companies you might work with, if at all. But then at a certain threshold, if you want to scale further, especially into the realm of end-to-end process automation, you will need to tap into what's called citizen development or business development. So people from non-professional IT departments without a professional IT or development background are supposed and enabled and empowered to at least partially build and run automations or applications. And that's possible. And we see so many examples where that works if done right. If done right means you need to have an appropriate governance model. And this is what I'd like to spend at least 1 or 2 minutes on. And generally, we see 3 levels of governance for any organization. It starts with the overarching organizational governance, so the compliance, which is relevant for you, the legislation, which is relevant for you, like security, depending on the industry, specific industry, compliance policies and regulations. And from those policies and regulations, usually IT derives IT governance with departmental policies around information security, data protection, all these types of security and governance, which sometimes are a little bit boring and challenging, but I mean, what can you do? Derived from IT governance, citizen development or business development governance is the next thing to do. So it should be in line with what IT governance has put up as a kind of umbrella, and citizen development governance or business development governance is then focusing more on the do's and don'ts of how to build automations, how to run automations in a federated, in a democratized organization for the sake of scaling it. And maybe this even deserves a separate webinar, but just to touch upon a couple most important areas when it comes to upskilling and empowering and enabling those citizen developers regarding end-to-end process automation. And again, there is much more, and we also have much more and more detailed research, but just to give you a couple of ideas of what's really important for these people to be enabled along, and it starts with a very simple things like project management. So I'm not pleading for the classic waterfallish kind of project management discipline, especially when it comes to task automation. This is not the story. So we are talking about complex end-to-end process automations here. So it's important to understand, does the effort citizen developers supported by professional developers are going to embark on some project management methodologies like tracking timelines, understanding who would be responsible for what, would we need budget approvals, budget clearance? So is it of that size? And if so, these citizen developers must understand that there are certain tools out there and that what they're going to build follows a certain life cycle. Similarly, project qualification. So what I'm going to build as a business developer, is that something I need an approval for? And if so, where do I get that from? How do I have to document and describe what I'm supposed to do? Is it potentially conflicting with other efforts, projects, agile, sprints, whatever? How to approach problem solving and solution planning, which is really key, because all too often what we see is, especially when the automation technology is available for everybody, and this automation technology seems very intuitive, very easy to use, people jump right in, and I do that myself. And then I realize after a couple minutes of, wait a minute, maybe it wasn't such a good idea, because actually I didn't really know fully what's my scope. And if the scope is a little bit more complex, talking processes here, we must make sure that the people who are supposed to help build those automations understand the scope, understand the underlying processes. Similarly, journey mapping, enable people to think in customer journeys and employee journeys when creating requirements. Type of guidance do you provide in terms of allowing all these people to design the applications? Is it just front-end design you allow them to do? What about data components, data access? So again, might deserve a separate webinar, but training and enablement are essential steps, and these should feed governance. And technological governance of your automation platform should be able to enforce some of these aspects I was just going through. This is really important. Now, to answer the question, which I already touched upon a couple of times, who should build and run which types of automations? So what's the area where these business developers compared to professional developers should sit and should be able to do anything they want to? And at Forrester, we have come up with a 3-zone model. I don't know if you've ever seen that. So zone 1 is an area which we are calling autonomous citizen development area. This is the area where the complexity of requirements is rather low, is the lowest, but still we are not talking mundane, simplistic task automation here. So we are talking more complex process automation. And what's equally important is that compliance, security, architectural requirements are rather low. And in this green zone, we are seeing lots of companies giving citizen developers a lot of freedom to develop, to build, to design, to run automations. And it's working well. And of course, with the advent of generative AI, this zone 1 is going to move. It's actually already moving to the right. It's getting bigger with technologies like copilots and others. Now there is zone 2, which will stay. It's this joint zone where citizen developers are supported, assisted, scrutinized by professional developers. I called it IT, but it's actually about professional developers, no matter where they sit. And this is because security and compliance requirements are higher. And it might be a company essential process you're automating here, and it has to follow certain rules. And it has to follow certain architectural constraints in order to make it composable, reusable, highly performant, which is something you couldn't expect from a citizen developer. And then there is zone 3, highest complexity when it comes to requirements, and also size, highest complexity when it comes to any type of complexity, compliance and security requirements. So there is a place for both, and there is even a great place for both to collaborate. And what we are seeing is, especially in the process automation space, when people are starting to collaborate, both those that are having this professional IT and development background and those who live the processes day in and day out, maybe coinciding with those that build the front end of those automations, it's always a great experience for both roles or both types of personas. It's only recommendable. What do we see in terms of how these scaled up automation organizations are organized? And initially, when I talked about what we are hearing and seeing about these typical COEs, centers of excellence, which, as the name indicates, are centralizing efforts and skills and licenses to leverage economies of scale. So this is something we see a lot, but not only. We also see this kind of, we are calling privateer model. It's usually at the very beginning of such an effort. So somebody, usually a business executive, sometimes an IT executive, sometimes both together, have an idea to automate processes. And then there are a couple volunteers or a couple people who are willing to help, and they build these automations. Now, this is not a scalable organizational model, of course not. So this COE model is by far the most frequent one we are seeing. So there is this center of excellence regarding process automation. It might sit in IT, might sit somewhere else. And anyone who enjoyed the training and the upskilling and maybe a certification is allowed and enabled to build and run automations. Now, the kind of holy grail, which is what we are seeing rarely, but many companies aspire to get there. And those that have been using process automation for quite some years are all moving into this federated, you could also call it democratized model. So there is still this IT COE construct, but compared to the model in the middle, it's even more empowering and enabling than governing. And it is building less, almost nothing, because this is done by anyone and the so-called departmental champions. And now this is also a kind of self-evolving model. So there doesn't have to be one layer of departmental champions and below those anyone, but these departmental champions could again empower lots of other departmental or team-like champions or individual contributors. And these could be, again, ambassadors for other people. So it's about evolving the skills and democratizing the skills across an organization. And again, those rare examples of this type of organization we are seeing are all working well because these organizations didn't skip one of these models. They learned from the beginning, they developed a center of excellence, they learned about the potential bottlenecks, about the potential frustration, because there are so many people who want to automate more. So moving in a federated model, which requires less governance, but more training, more upskilling, more enablement, that's actually the trick. This is my last slide, and what I'd like to summarize my speech with, and this is kind of independent of the specific technology you're using, but what we have been seeing throughout the years is so many automation disasters because people, for whatever reason, rush at automation, rush at any technology, try to build stuff rapidly, and it might work, but it also might run into disasters, customer-facing disasters, employee-driven disasters, and this is what you might want to avoid, also to not risk your reputation as a company. Follow a 4 or 5 step path. It doesn't have to be one-on-one what you can see here, but what you need to understand first before you apply any technology is what the problem is. We are calling it discovery and analysis phase. I put there process mining as a good tool. Personally, I'm a friend of process mining, but it's not like Forrester is mandating you to use process mining, otherwise you will fail. Process mining, equally with task mining and some other process discovery tools, provide you a rather fast and objective state of how the company operates and how the process operates you're intending to automate, which is why I quite like it. Then there is a third phase, document, which doesn't mean that you manually map the processes, could do that, but not necessarily. All I'm trying to say or bring along is that documentation means that you identified and write down those areas you intend to automate out of the whole process. Maybe it's the whole process, maybe not. And it's also about understanding the weaknesses of the process. Many weaknesses don't require any automation technology. You can just remove steps as you understood that. Some some tasks have just been added through the years, but some of these are no longer necessary. There are still people working in those, completing those, but actually you don't need them anymore. And this is why process analysis is so important. Doesn't have to take months, can be a quick exercise, and then you go in iterations, but it's important to have this discovery and analysis phase, and then write down your findings and what you want to improve. And what you want to improve is manifested in the re-engineering phase, which says, how are we going to realize these improvements? Is it going to be RPA? Is it going to be a DPA solution which orchestrates RPA bots, document processing steps, generative AI, a chatbot, an integration like an API, or what have you, and then maybe a bot again, but it's all orchestrated along a process automation solution. And then you build and run the automation. This is the last step, automate. And this is not a one-way street. This is not a unique and once in a lifetime exercise, but it's repeated, it's continuous, it never stops, because there is always a way to improve your company's essential processes. And this is all I wanted to share with you today. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Ursula.
Thank you so much. And wow, that was so much information in such a short space of time. So thank you so much for that, Bernhard. And hopefully during our next section here, which we're going to kickstart a more of an interview style, we might even deep dive into some of those key topics that you just discussed. But let's jump straight in. So welcome back, Gerard. And for this next portion of this webinar, we're going to interview our experts on 3 key topics. And then at the end, I can see some questions are coming in already. And then at the end, what we'll do is we will hand over to our audience and we will ask, you to answer their questions, Bernhard and Gerard. But let's kick off in terms of process innovation. So Forrester research has obviously shown that companies driving sustainable approach to innovation grow 2.5 times more than their industry average per year. And it's with this in mind that I'd like to ask you both to share your recipes for process innovation success. So Gerard, let's kickstart with you, and maybe you can share how you think organizations can kickstart their process innovation.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ursula. So I suppose from my own experience, I think that the greatest source of process innovation is normally from the people who are working in the processes. Because, I mean, fundamentally, people working in the process know what things need to be fixed, what things need to be streamlined, where there's opportunity for improvement. So I think if you can kind of harness that information and gather that information from the people who are doing the day-to-day jobs, that's a really useful source of innovation. But sometimes I think that you need to there's a challenge in actually getting people to imagine what the future could look like or where they could go. And I think in that case, sharing case studies from similar organizations can add a lot of value. And that often kind of inspires people and kickstarts that whole process where they see, oh yeah, we could do this as well. So I think that can be very valuable. But one of the things, I mean, Bernhard mentioned this in his slides about the process being repetitive, where you're automating and continually improving your processes. So I think it's really important to build up that momentum in an organization. And what we would see with our customers is there's kind of a light bulb moment when that first automated process goes live and people say, now I understand it. And now I understand what I could possibly achieve in my organization. Because that first process is really is something that people can kind of gather around and understand. It's much more relatable within their own business than something outside the business and somebody telling them about what they could possibly do. So I think kind of in summary then, what I'd say is talk to the people in the business. They often have the best ideas. Share examples of what other organizations are doing, maybe organizations similar to your own, and try and create that internal reference point, which allows you to promote innovation and process automation within the organization.
Great. Thanks, Gerard. And Bernhard, this next question might nicely follow up on Gerard's point there, but what would your tips be for organizations on how they would create and nurture a culture that, drives continuous focus on process innovation?
My tips. Well, it's about, in my opinion, and from what I have been seeing, this general theme of nurturing a process mindset across an organization. And that always has to start from the top. in order to make it successful. If top management is continuously reinforcing the functional silo structure and is only increasing the pressure on efficiency-only targets that are tailored to functional silos, and you only see functional responsibilities and hierarchies are tailored to functions and functional departments, how should a process mindset be cultivated? And of course, we see these grassroots movement where people understand through the power of collaboration or through working with customer journey mapping disciplines and canvases or employee journey maps, that there is so much more to it, but still they won't get beyond a certain point. And out of the organizations we are talking to, those who manage to nurture such a culture that drives process innovation, all of them, either besides their functional organization or even without it, they have built a somewhat process-oriented organization model. And especially with the proliferation of agile outside of the IT unit, thinking end-to-end, it's what we are seeing is enjoying a revival when done right. And having said that, of course, it's about upskilling and education, thinking in end-to-end processes and understanding how to identify process weaknesses. It's not self-explanatory, and it's nor taught during any higher education or college or university studies. So this is an area that requires upskilling. I hope that was a tip.
Yes, that was a great tip. And sticking on the theme of innovation, Gerard, how do you think organizations can define and measure innovation outcomes?
Yeah, I think that can be quite tricky because it really depends on, what the kind of KPIs are from one business to another. So in some cases, people are measuring innovation outcomes based on, money saved, time saved, those kind of things. In other cases, it might be based on improvements in customer service, while in other organizations, it may be on the business growth they've managed to achieve through the innovation they've implemented. I mean, from our own point of view, with some of the successes our customers have had, we would have seen returns in all of those areas for different types of organizations. And I think there's one particular organization that stands out, and what they did is innovation is absolutely core to their business. So they're a global leader in the commercial drinks industry. And I think one of the challenges there is constantly innovating around different products and bringing products to the market. So they had quite a well-defined innovation process where they were measuring each product as it went through its development stages. They were measuring the outcomes and recording those. So they were putting about 300 products through this process every year, and each one took anything up to 6 months to go through the process. So what they did is they actually automated that process using FlowForma, and they brought down the overall end-to-end lead time from 6 weeks to 8 weeks. So that was quite a saving for them. So in that case, they applied innovation to their innovation process and achieved good outcomes out of that in terms of the time saved. So I think kind of in looking at how you can define and measure innovation, I think the first thing you need to do is establish the measure that makes sense for your business. I also think it's very important to remember to establish a baseline of what the before situation was like so that you can understand what you've actually gained out of it. And then I think if it makes sense, if your innovation processes are working well, it actually can make sense to put in place a fairly structured innovation process using things like stage gates and automating that in a way to allow you, I suppose, accelerate the innovation that you can bring into your business.
Great, thank you, Gerard. And moving into our next topic of skilled shortage. So this is something that we have been hearing a lot about in the last 6 to 12 months. And we're living in a world now where 90% of our employees feel burdened with repetitive tasks, where process automation could quickly provide a serious upkeep in productivity by taking the onus off employees. It's with this in mind that, I think it's quite important that we discuss how to alleviate those skill shortages today. So Bernhard, what type of digitalization strategy would you recommend organizations implement to support them with the skill shortages?
So first of all, I'd love to see more digitalization strategies or vision states or target states that don't speak too much about or focus only on the digital platforms and tools the company is going to implement by when, and then implicitly assuming that everybody will adopt the technology and everybody will benefit, and then you're done. And this is unfortunately what I'm seeing all too often. And of course, you could introduce all these tools and platforms, and we all know that this is not the core challenge. But again, we are seeing so many of these strategies. So my recommendation is to focus on the area where the struggle begins, and that is the people. So normally you're facing at least 3 categories of individuals on your employment level. First of all, those that are the passionate volunteers. Then another group, those that are rather afraid, up to very afraid, and also hesitant out of certain fears, maybe up to losing their jobs, or generally they don't have a strong belief in themselves, or maybe the concerns about not being able to adopt a new way of working or not going to enjoy that. So lots of concerns and fears. And then category number 3, those that just don't want to change. They resist because they want that for whatever reason. It's not out of concerns, it's out of I don't want to. Now, each of these categories or groups deserves different messaging, enablement, training, support, and it's important to identify each individual's category they are in at the point in time when you start that digital journey. And it also should be reflected in your digitalization strategy and also how you communicate that strategy. So for example, the volunteers, they must get access to all these beautiful digital technologies as soon as possible. And then you turn them into your positive ambassadors and multipliers for the rest of the organization. And you have to give them a voice, but then they are so much more powerful than any strategy you could ever sketch. And then you would focus on those with the concerns and the fears, and you would try to understand those concerns. And this is very, very time consuming, which is why many transformational program leaders and teams don't really spend too much time on that, because they believe it's more important to keep the timeline than focusing on the real outcome, besides the kind of superficial metrics they are measured against. But it's worth the effort, and it will help them to adapt and contribute. And then, of course, there is this group of unwilling, and they also must be tackled differently, either through very proactive support, but in many cases that doesn't work. So maybe proactive support would find its way into helping them finding another role at the company, or another position at the company, or even at another company. Many organizations just accept that they are there, because usually this group is very small and a fraction of the total workforce. So something between 1% and 5% is what we usually are able to come up with. So many companies are just accepting this fraction without further action. Yeah, I don't know if this qualifies for a strategy, but this is what I'd recommend. It's also based off of my own experiences in my past.
Great. And Gerard, maybe you could respond to Bernhard's points there and share with us how you think that no code can support this approach.
Yeah, sure. Well, obviously, we're big proponents of the whole no-code approach, but I think, organizations realize that they need to automate a lot of the mundane, repetitive tasks that people are doing, but they're blocked in doing so because they don't have access to the right skills to do that. And normally that's IT skills and IT departments which are already backed up with lots of things people are trying to do. So I think moving to a no-code type approach enables really the business to take a lot more ownership of that. And ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, business people are the best people. They know the process. They know how to go about automating it. So I think, leveraging their experience and capabilities and giving them the right tools to allow them go on that process automation journey has a lot of benefits for the organization. So I think, it's really a kind of it's a constant cycle. As you enable the business to automate more processes, more is automated. Therefore, more time is given back to the business, therefore helping you address the overall skills shortage. So eliminating all those mundane tasks, like around things like, sending emails, generating documents, handing off work, making decisions, all those kind of things. The more of those you actually eliminate and automate, then the more time you give back to the business so that they have more time, so there are more skills available within the pool of business. And one of the impressive examples we have of that is Abington Whitney College, where they set about automating some administration processes because they knew they were kind of admin heavy in certain areas. So they automated one, measured the results of it, and then based on that, they did what we love to see happening. They automated multiple processes quickly after that. And the net result was they saved 6,000 hours across all of their staff. So that's on an annual basis. So if you got 6,000 hours back from your staff base, then that's equivalent to a few extra people being available in the business with the skills that they actually have to do other higher value add tasks. So I think that's kind of how no code really helps and can support organizations there in overcoming that skills shortage by helping automate things to free up people to do more valuable tasks.
Brilliant. That is super impressive to hear, Gerard. Thank you for sharing. Now, for our third topic here, organizations that obviously excel in automation will outperform those who don't. I think that we will all agree with that. And DPA remains an important process transformation tool. But for this section, I think it'd be really informative for our audience to hear your best practice advice and benchmarks for success in process automation. So Gerard, in most organizations, staff desire self-service tools, and we just spoke about no code, to empower them to get work done smarter and faster. But how do you recommend organizations govern this?
I think this is one of the big challenges that most organizations face nowadays as they bring citizen developers into the overall equation. I mean, Bernhard had the 3 zones he talked about there. We all live in a world where there's heightened security requirements, heightened compliance requirements, etc. So I think not all organizations are willing to simply enable citizen developers without some sort of guardrails around the work that they're actually doing. But at the same time, what you're trying to do is give the business users the tools that they want to use and those applications they want to use to allow them go forward. So I think the first thing really, and Bernhard alluded to this as well, is getting a kind of standard set of applications that can be used in the business. So you don't have people willy-nilly taking tools, applications, etc., to allow them automate their processes. So even just deciding on a kind of canvas of applications that can be used in the business is your first kind of form of governance. And I think after that, then it's really taking some of the best practices out of software development life cycles and applying them to citizen developer initiatives. And they don't, what that really means is that you have kind of best practices like giving people an environment where they can actually do development work, where they're not interfering with production, and then providing oversight over the work they've done. So when they finish doing the development, they have to get somebody else to approve it, and that person can then review it and make sure security concerns are addressed, it's in line with corporate standards, those kind of things. And then they can promote that out into a test area where a wider audience can test out the process, and that in turn, once that's successful, can be promoted up into a production type environment. So just having those simple kind of gates that things have to go through is a good form of governance and reassures the stakeholders that there is some oversight on what is actually being created for the business. So I think, governance and control and no-code solutions is definitely required and is needed by the business and the stakeholders. And it's important, though, to get the balance right, that the level of governance you're applying doesn't in any way block the initiatives that you've taken to enable your business people to actually automate and develop more of their own applications.
Great. Bernhard, is there anything you'd like to add to Gerard's point there?
So first of all, I fully agree, and this also is in line with what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, what we are hearing and seeing now. Of course, when you are in that situation for the first time, that people are looking for these self-service tools and what's the right level of empowerment, and usually then the natural reaction is give them less to kind of contain the damage they're potentially going to cause. This is something I wouldn't recommend, even though there might be some damage that might happen. But there is a powerful lever, and that is you start in places where the potential damage is limited anyway. And what we are also seeing from different companies is that they pilot such self-servicing citizen development, less governance projects in one department or one team, and they tell the individuals that, you know, this is a pilot, and we were not able to secure everything, so you have a high degree of responsibility in what you build, so you better ask before you hit the production or live button. And this seems to work very well. So again, it's about mutual trust. It's about the willingness to collaborate on both sides, those that provide something and those that will consume and benefit from something, and then it works.
Great. And Bernhard, while we're chatting here, it would be great to get your thoughts on what you think the future of DPA looks like, and what do you think the role of the citizen developer is going to be in the next 2 to 5 years?
I'm convinced of a very bright future for both process automation and also the citizen developer tools. Yeah, and I talk about why and what's going on. So if we look into the next, it's always hard to predict the future, right? In the next 2 to 3 years, I'm convinced that process automation and orchestrating processes along a set of automation or other technologies that will be spread across a spectrum and a federated spectrum of roles. And those roles will access common automation platforms. So almost everybody across the company will either be involved or even empowered to contribute to process automation, or will merely benefit from it. And that comes in small incremental steps, but again, in the next 2 to 3 years, this is going to be massive. And if we even look further out, maybe 2 more years or so, we are convinced that even business-related roles, sales, marketing, procurement, all of the corporate functions, but also line of business-related, purely business roles, they will begin to require, not only desire, but require low-code, no-code development tools and according skills, because it's so necessary. And then if we fast forward a couple more years, there will be the pivotal point where it won't make a difference anymore. So it won't be called process automation or development of an automation. It will just be part of work, at least for those roles that work more digitally or with digital content than others.
And Gerard, I see you nodding there. You definitely agree with what Bernhard is saying?
Yeah, no, I would absolutely agree with that. I do think it's going to become more prevalent. And I think, the whole citizen developer approach is just going to become something that's standard within a business. It's effectively carrying on from something we saw years ago where we had end user driven development in some areas, people building complex spreadsheets, etc. So it's a step up from that, but it is a continuation of that journey as you get a more digitally aware staff, and also people who actually want the challenge of moving into that citizen developer role where they can solve more of their own problems. So yeah, absolutely, I would see that as being the way forward.
And Gerard, maybe to add to that point, as you mentioned Excel, we both know that there are so many companies who run basically on Excel, and this is actually the risk. And as you said, a continuation of people building stuff in Excel because they only have Excel at hand. So it's a much better approach to give them the right tools that even allow to provide governance and also enforce, I don't know, accessing the right data sources and considering the right access privileges. Excel doesn't do that. So it's imposing a risk for the company, whereas a real process automation tool, it helps you with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. It is that. I mean, Excel is a big risk, and lots of companies do run on it. And it's giving people the right tools is definitely a major step forward.
Great, thank you so much both for that. I'd like to leave some time just for the end of the webinar so we can answer some questions from our audience. So we might move on. The time is just flying away here. But Gerard, would you mind just sharing a little bit about FlowForma? I'm sure people are wondering, who we are and what we do, and maybe you could just spend, 2 to 3 minutes just sharing some information on how we can support some of our listeners.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So FlowForma, one of the original pioneers in the whole no-code process automation space. So our product's very closely aligned with Office 365, which has the advantage that it makes it really accessible to people. So lots of businesses are using 365, and FlowForma sits alongside that. So it's very accessible, and people can dive right in and try out the application. So I think the other key thing about us is that we understand that to automate a process successfully, you really need to bring a number of different elements together. So within FlowForma, we have the ability to capture data through forms. We have the ability to automate decision making, routing of work, etc., through workflow. And we also have the ability to generate documents, which is a very kind of broad topic in that we can send out emails, create documents. And do other things that you might need to do, which are the outputs processes. But the key thing is that all of these capabilities are in one place. You don't have to go off to lots of different tools to actually put all of these capabilities together. They're all available to you at your fingertips in a no-code way. On top of that, we realize obviously that process doesn't exist as an island, and it needs to integrate with the other applications that exist in your business. So we have a wide array of integration methods as well that people can use to tie into the other applications. So overall, we've quite a large customer base, hundreds of thousands of users scattered across the globe. And I think if you look at the various sectors that they're in, you'll see they're in healthcare, construction, oil and gas, transport, manufacturing. So really, there's lots of different sectors that we serve. And I suppose it's a really positive endorsement of FlowForma's application that it can be used cross-sectorally in lots of different processes and still deliver lots of benefit to the people who are actually using it. So just one final point, we love working closely with our customers to guide them on their process automation journey, and I think that reflects positively in all the very nice G2 reviews that we've actually managed to accumulate over the years. So that's a little quick overview of FlowForma.
Great, thank you, Gerard. And I'm sure if anyone is looking for more information, they can take a look at our website. We have plenty of process experts there who'd be happy to give you a personalized demonstration as well. So feel free to pop over to flowforma.com to find out more. But we might move over to the Q&A. I can see some questions coming in from our audience, which is great. So keep them coming. Bernhard, Joshua asked this question. You might have slightly answered it during your presentation, but I just want to go back to this point in case anyone else is having similar thoughts. So he's basically asking you, how can organizations prepare if there's pushback and individuals wanting to keep in their traditional ways, and they might be worried about their own roles and how technology might affect that?
Oh, that's a broad question. So you cannot prepare a lot, because how would you know what's going to happen? And generally preparing for pushback is always hard. Preparation could look as follows. You dedicate time to the anticipated resistance, and you will then be able to dedicate time to talk with the individuals about the motivations behind the resistance. And as you rightly said, Ursula, I touched upon that. And understanding those concerns and pushback is really important, because usually in the majority of cases, you're naturally able to provide good arguments why this is a concern, a fear, a reason for resistance that actually doesn't matter because it doesn't materialize. Job losses, for example, this is something you could prepare for. So in all your messaging and communications, you could reinforce the message that this is not about job losses, and automation will not kill your job. It's going to make your job easier. You will be able to do more in the same amount of time. It will be less repetitive and mundane, yada, yada, yada. But so the preparation is rather, thinking about a couple arguments you could anticipate, but then go right into the perceived resistance and have conversations with the people.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think techniques to overcome that really are involving people from the start, so everyone's clear on what's going on, and communicating all the time with people so that they get to understand what the objectives are and what the expected outcome is. And then that's where I mentioned kind of providing examples when we were talking about innovation, but providing examples there as well can also help set aside some of the fears that people have.
Great, thank you both. And we have another question from Teresa, who I believe is asking a very similar question. So this must be a topic on everyone's mind. But she's more focusing on workflows, and she's saying that she believes that engineering companies might be an easier experience to bring citizen development into their organizations. But Gerard, maybe you could share how, in FlowForma we've seen organizations across the board in various industries utilize no-code process automation, and how that shouldn't be a challenge.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the beauty of no code is that it is actually very accessible to people without in-depth technical skills. But I also think that the overall digital capabilities in the workforce is constantly improving. And people are well able to understand and figure out the tools that they're given to actually help them do their job. So, you know, it's not something that people are phased by. They can actually dive straight in and actually start solving problems themselves. So generally, I'd say that it's not just engineering companies. We've had lots of success with people who are very much focused around the business side of things. But as Bernhard was saying, a lot of the time it's about kind of a champion taking it and running with it and promoting the capability throughout the organization. That champion is rarely a software engineer or an IT person.
Great. And yeah, just one question I would love to ask both of you is, maybe Bernhard, you could start off. Are there any common pitfalls that you would recommend organizations, steer clear of?
Yes, absolutely. And that's again coming back to my implicit notion about this whole credibility and trust element, which you cannot overemphasize. So instead of trying to boil the ocean with all these long-running, maybe overwhelming programs and transformation programs and automation programs, why not start with 1 to 2 to 3 very small incremental changes that would demonstrate the value of digitalization or whatever you have in mind regarding automation or just automation itself. And then you use the word of mouth spreading because of the good things this small incremental change could do for people. And you build on that with more disruptive but still smaller implementations. And this creates trust and credibility. And this is such an invaluable foundation because it can serve as a springboard for the real thing, for this end-to-end automation across the organization where it makes sense. So it's about creating trust and credibility. That's my pitfall, if you try to dance around it.
Great. And Gerard, would you like to add something quickly?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to me, it's hugely about momentum. And I mean, it ties into Bernhard's point, but you can look at it as kind of a sports team as they move towards getting into the final. And they're always building momentum by winning games, etc. behind them. It's the same thing, in my opinion, with process automation. As you embark on the process automation journey, you need to get wins under your belt so that you can effectively build up that momentum and that enthusiasm in an organization to continue to your process automation journey and to make sure that it doesn't in any way stall. So I think sometimes people look at their most complex process, their most difficult process, the ones that give them the biggest return to actually start with. If they aren't mature in their thinking around process, I would advise starting with smaller processes that you can get a quick win with and build that momentum towards that final.
Brilliant. Well, just on time, we just have a couple of seconds left. But Bernhard and Gerard, thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope our audience enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And just before we go, I just want to thank our audience for being here today. There are some additional resources in the GoToWebinar panel. Feel free to download those at your desire. And we would also love if you could leave your feedback as part of our survey at the end of this webinar. And as I mentioned earlier on, if you're looking for a next step and you're more interested in FlowForma, please visit our website, www.flowforma.com/demo, and we will have a process expert who will be able to showcase you our tool and give you some advice, one-to-one advice on how we can support you in your business. But thank you all for being here today, and thank you again to our speakers.